Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today to continue debate on this very important private members bill that deals with amending the Competition Act to address the woeful lack of competition in our country, particularly a degrading lack of competition that has occurred after 8 years under this Liberal government. And I'm very disappointed to hear the previous Liberal speaker talk about how they intend to not support this legislation. They expect Canadians to trust them and trust that their legislation has all the solutions needed to solve the competition problems. But many of these competition problems, as I will show in my speech, have been caused by the sheer amount of consolidation that has happened in the Canadian marketplace under 8 years of this Liberal government. For example, Canadians pay the highest cell phone bills in the developed world, with 3 times more than Australia pays and twice as much as our neighbors in the United States. And I remember under the previous Conservative government how hard our government worked to bring in new wireless players into the Canadian market to help bring down prices for Canadian consumers. And all of this hard work was unraveled under this Liberal government with the merger of Rogers and Shaw, which eliminated a major new entrant into the market that was providing much needed competition. You can also look at our banking sector, which is extraordinarily controlled by 6 large banking firms, and now we've seen yet another takeover in the banking sector, which has further consolidated Canadians' mortgages under a relatively few amount of very large companies. And finally, also just look at the amount of consolidation happening in our airline sector, with Canada dominated 85% by just 2 large airlines, and more mergers coming, and the government even going after some of the new players with tax bills that are threatening to take out new players out of our airline market. You know, when this Liberal government came to power nearly a decade ago, Canadians had a choice of 8 Canadian grocery chains. And now, after 8 years of this Liberal government, we're dominated by just 3 Canadian companies and 2 American multinational corporations. Mr. Speaker, these are not signs of a healthy, dynamic, and competitive marketplace. They are signs of a country which has an outdated approach to competition. And the reality is that this is a Canadian problem. And while this Liberal government blames international trends on the increasing prices we're seeing at the grocery stores and on our cell phone bills, the fundamental problem is the lack of choice that Canadians have, and it's forcing consumers to pay more. The Competition Act is in desperate need of reform, and it is rooted in a history of an industrial policy that sought to protect large Canadian companies from foreign competition, but it does nothing to promote competition domestically. And in fact, I'm not even sure if the goal of having these companies protected so that they can grow is even achieving those ends in this country, because they're so protected. We're not seeing the innovation that we need in this country to really develop the next level of technologies and practices. Canada's weak competition laws allow a very few cartels to dominate whole industries. They shut out competitors, they drive up profits, and in this process, consumers are the obvious victims. They pay more for goods and services, and these aren't always of the best quality, and this lack of choice leaves Canadians with no other options. And now, this doesn't just affect consumers. Indeed, the impact of this failing Competition Act has immense consequences on small and medium-sized producers. I come from an area with a lot of farmers, and we know that these big companies dictate prices to these farmers, and that really has an impact on them as well. You know, my riding is also home to one of Canada's largest family-owned grocery chains, Friesen Brothers, which was founded in 1955. And Friesen Brothers, I'm very proud that they're in my riding. They have a number of locations across Alberta. I believe they're the largest grocery store chain that isn't part of the major grocery store chains in Canada. They're really known for their high-quality products. They have excellent butcher shops. They have their own brand of sourdough, which is actually listed in one of the museums for bread across the world. I believe it's in Belgium, and they've developed a made-in-Alberta sourdough bread. We're very proud of that. You can walk into any Friesen Brothers location in Alberta, and you'll immediately sense the high standard of care and quality that they put into all their products. And this is a great example of a made-in-Canada business that promotes excellence and craftsmanship in their field. Now, sadly, many smaller companies like Friesen Brothers face immense hurdles to participate in the market. This high concentration of control amongst the very large companies has entrenched players that have become price setters in the market. When the Loblaws and the Walmarts of the world dictate what the prices will be for the products on the shelves, it's the smaller players that end up holding the bag and paying higher prices. Take Coca-Cola, for example. Loblaws controls 62% of the Canadian market for Coca-Cola. That means that Loblaws effectively determines what the price is, not only for consumers, but for what all the other smaller players and distributors are paying as well. Now, how can smaller companies compete with these tactics? The answer is they can't. If you walk in any grocery store aisle, you can be sure that the price that smaller grocery stores pay for items like soda and other products is higher than that paid by the major players. It's a huge competitive edge. And while it may save consumers a couple of cents at the stores, it comes at the cost of eliminating real competition that would create long-term better prices for consumers. Now, I'd ask my colleagues in the government what happened to their concerns over the middle class and those working hard to join them. After 8 years of their reckless spending and fiscal incompetence, we know that for a fact that hardworking Canadians are worse off. They're taxed more than ever, and they're paying more for these basic goods and services that they need to live their lives. Now, Roger, for example, the cost of, and as we've seen, Canada's weak competition laws continue to serve the interests of these large established players to the detriment of new players. Now, I want to talk about one very specific aspect of the competition rules that I don't think has been talked about enough. And one of those aspects is the term of restrictive covenants in real estate development. And what is a restrictive covenant, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you, it's when a developer buys land intending to build a grocery store and other businesses, a strip mall, for example, and they'll often be approached by one of the big players saying, we want to put our location in your area, and it's going to attract all these other ancillary businesses that want to be involved. So attracting a big store like a Walmart is a big draw for a lot of small businesses who want to build in these big parking lots and in these well-attended locations. Now, the Walmarts and the superstores of the world don't want to enter a development if they think they're going to face competition. And so on the one hand, I think it is completely fair that a grocery store doesn't want to have another grocery store right next to them in the same parking lot, but I don't think it's fair when you have restricted covenants that say somebody can't start a small butcher shop or a small boutique bakery because there's a bakery or a butcher shop in the grocery store, and they pass these restrictive covenants that say no other business can engage in any business that the grocery store is engaged in. And so I really think what we're doing is we're sterilizing the business sectors in our communities, and it's because of these restrictive covenants. And that's really preventing a lot of small and medium-sized butchers and bakers and other businesses that compete with the grocery stores from getting into these developments and from producing their superior boutique products. And I really think this is an area of the Competition Act that we need to look at much more deeply, because I feel that it is not only giving a huge advantage to these big incumbent players, but it's also really hurting our small and medium-sized enterprises and our consumers. Now, as you can see, Mr. Speaker, our current competition laws are seriously lacking the sophistication and are a major contributor to the problem. And far from creating competition, the current regime allows for the proliferation of monopolies all across our economy. Now, the Competition Bureau has said that we need to encourage foreign companies to enter the Canadian market. Now, I'm not necessarily against foreign companies, but I'm wondering to myself why the minister is spending so much time burning up the phones, trying to bring a big foreign new player into the Canadian market when we haven't even addressed the rules and the barriers that are preventing great Canadian companies like the Friesen Brothers of the world and other companies from being able to compete in the Canadian market. Why can't we remove the barriers so that we can allow a small and medium-sized Canadian business to become a big grocery player rather than always having to go abroad to look to bring in another grocery player? Now, as the Friesen Brothers told me in a text message, they said innovation is at the heart of small and medium-sized businesses, and survival is the driver, and community is the beneficiary. Now, I would like to support this update to the law. I think there are a lot of things in here that could help, and I look forward to this passing and being studied at committee, because it's companies like Friesen Brothers and other small grocery stores and boutique bakeries and butchers that are the real fabric of our community, that make our communities so special and unique. And we need to do everything we can as parliamentarians to create a business climate that promotes Canadian innovators, promotes Canadian investment, promotes Canadian jobs, and that creates the competition that we need in this country to ensure that we have that dynamic marketplace that will provide the benefits that this country so sorely needs in this troubling economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.